Today, what we look for and what we realized over the last 6 years is the profit pools in construction, contrary to the popular narrative, you can actually build profitable businesses right from day one.
Yeah.
And that is not a verdict on the ambition of the founder or the company.
You had to have nuanced knowledge in order to know that the physical substance is actually going to allow you to build a moat and to design the merit order of the renovation measures. This wrong setup that over time has crept into the industry, that then makes the employed investors that we're referring to here not embrace the discomfort, but to release the discomfort on the founders. Where the co-investor, an employed investor at a large firm, is then calling the founder 3-4 times a week, hey, how is fundraising going? Not because they want to help, but because they want to have news to report.
Yeah.
At some point, communication does not scale anymore. So keeping a small team in a knowledge-based job that the whole value is driven by decision-making, like VC, you need to make sure that information flows exceptionally seamlessly. And for that, keeping small teams is really key.
The case of that SaaS company, so there was like a enormous difference between what was reported as revenues and what was shown to us. And I actually asked the guy, hey, how do you explain this? And he's like, hey, I don't know, I have to ask my CFO. That is not acceptable. If you're a founder, you better get used to reporting a lot, because I think in what I've seen, it's an early and leading indicator of success.
Yeah.
All the biggest misses, there was like a very consistent pattern where I was initially excited, but then someone talked me out of it.
Convictions with Patrick and Shub. So in this episode, we're going to discuss some of the convictions Foundamental has developed through the early journey, how founders can work better with their investors, and some lessons learned from you guys, the biggest convictions you've unlearned and new convictions that you've had to learn. Come on.
Shub, Patrick Shub. What are the key convictions that Fundamental has developed at its early journey?
I mean, in the end, it's hard to summarize all the convictions that you have as a venture investor, because it's such a, similar to AECS industry, nuanced business that you really have to, cover for a lot of different aspects in the partnership with the founder. But there are 4 that over time we made our core. So the first one, and they really cover what we look for and how we work. So the first one is we look and chase vertical singularities. The second one is we like to look for opportunities where we can bring in the nuanced knowledge that we earned. The third one is we distill and direct truths into the relationships with founders. And the fourth one is we embrace discomfort.
Okay, can we elaborate on any of those?
Maybe which one would you like to
Let's
start
go
with?
vertical singularities.
Yes.
So vertical singularities for us means that, again, generational companies do not repeat. And it's the job of the investor to find companies that become, in their own right, uniquely a legendary firm, but they're gonna be legendary and a category creator because they are built on unique ingredients, which means we're looking for these vertical singularities in our sectors, architecture, engineering, construction, supply chain, and the sectors that are affected by those. Because there is a nuance, there is a quirk, there is a weird occurrence of something, that's what we call a singularity in this vertical that makes it unique from any other vertical. And because our conviction at Foundamental is that the next 100 plus generational companies will be built in these weird verticals like ours, it's our job to find these singularities that only occur once in almost a freakish occurrence of nature, because it's these singularities that allow you to build a company with unique ingredients that attacks these singularities.
So most of the companies are so-called regularities, and then 0.5% or whatever number
less
is.
than that probably, yeah.
These
Yeah,
are
I would say much lesser than that.
much less than that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the question perhaps going off in our minds right now is what is even a singularity, right? I mean, because you started off with perhaps an attempt at a definition. Is it 0.5% of the cohort of companies? I think in my mind, what defines like a singularity, and then we'll talk about combining it with the vertical aspect of it, is it sort of breaks the narrative on what you think is likely to be successful or what other VC investors or generic investors think is necessary as ingredients of success, or what will see a massive adoption. And depending on how much time we have, we can get into the hidden but obvious but hidden framework that we like to use at Foundamental to figure out what patterns perhaps make sense for the next big inflection. But essentially, it's a singularity would be a firm or a model which makes a lot of sense in the specific nuance that it's been immersed in with the customer base or the use case, but which seemingly is completely contradicting what the popular narrative or the consensus narrative is of how a company should be built.
An example. So Inframarket has been a tremendous success for us. It was one of the earliest companies that we invested in from our 2019 fund vintage, which was our first fund. And over time, working with the founders, it's Shub's relationship, we realized that a vertical singularity exists in India in this space, where you have a manufacturing base of specific building materials categories. Think stones, rocks, the term is aggregates. Think ready-mix concrete, so basically the concrete that you mix in a plant off-site, then you fill it into a truck, and then you transfer it to a construction site. These plants in India at the time, and I would say to this day, you would have a very long tail of these plants that are underutilized and under-branded, meaning they needed more revenue and had more capacity to generate revenue, but they had no seat at the table with a specific category in construction that was inflecting in India, and to this day is, and that's infrastructure projects. An infrastructure project, Shub, in India, how much is India going to invest in infrastructure in the next years?
Next few years, planning up to $1.4 trillion.
So yeah. It's 150 billion just this year and next year, right? But so you're now a mom and pop operator of a ready-mix concrete plant. You have no access to these projects in spite of being under capacity, underutilization. So you have this path to grow. The vertical singularity in this specific market condition that Inframarket built upon was it acquired capacity from these plants. It didn't acquire the plants, it didn't acquire the concrete, it acquired capacity. And that was such a controversial and contrarian move, but it fitted exactly what this market was looking for, what the plant owners were looking for. So they received revenue certainty, and Inframarket received the ability to market that capacity towards infrastructure projects. And that's something that, unlike any other sector, it worked in this one.
Staying with this example, when I square what we're talking about, vertical singularity, and with the specific example of Inframarket, actually what stands out the most in my mind, which actually back in the day was like a dramatic observation, like it really took me by surprise. And today, of course, it's very much in fashion, as in a company being profitable. But I remember when I first met Inframarket, quick tangent, we met for the first time on Valentine's Day. We always like to joke about it. Like, it was like a beautiful love story made for everyone. So I'm glad we look at it that way. But anyway, so leaving that aside, so when we met, I remember when we went through the financials in the meeting, every year since the start, which is true to this day, had a net income margin. So in other words, just to emphasize what that means is you're profitable, at a operating level, and you've paid your taxes, paid whatever cost of debt, etc., and you're profitable at a net level as a startup, which I thought was crazy, right? I even remember, asking the founder right in the first meeting, how is this happening? Is this a sign perhaps that this is a lifestyle business and it's not a venture business? And I think now that I think back, this was perhaps an example of a single, my mind and my own biases and my comfort zone coming to reality with a narrative violation or a singularity of construction businesses. Like today, what we look for and what we realized over the last 6 years is the profit pools in construction, contrary to the popular narrative, you can actually build profitable businesses right from day one. Yeah. And that is not a verdict on the ambition of the founder or the company, right? Even back in the day, and to be fair, as I've just said, even I kind of was about to fall into that fallacy, but the popular venture capital mindset is, hey, profits are for another day, maybe when you go public or whatever. Until then, just, fail fast, fail hard or whatever, and keep, try hard, etc. And that involves burning cash. It doesn't have to be that way.
In case of inframarket, is it like geography playing a big role within its success in terms of large funds for development and infrastructure of the country, or not necessarily?
So yes and no. And the reason why I would say yes and no is, and we also quite often discuss it, if that were the case, there shouldn't be just one infra market, right? There should be either many firms that are equivalent or competing very intensely, or you find other enablers in say similar markets, not the same. I mean, India had a lot of things and has a lot of things going for it, but you should see similar dynamics. I think I would take nothing away from the manner in which the firm was built and the choices leading up to creating a model, which to this day, it's still very different from the typical venture-backed startup model. I think all of those came together. The market definitely helped, for sure. So not taking that away.
And that's the fallacy with backing category clones. So oftentimes when, as an investor, you can kind of talk yourself into, hey, this company looks like that company that has been successful. But when you use this heuristic, you're running the risk of ignoring the market conditions that made the original category creator so successful. And if you ignore them and you're in poor luck, the market conditions of the clone you're backing are just not going to be the same. But they contribute more than 50% of its original success, right? So when you ask, hey, inframarket success, how much did the vertical singularity contribute? That's our answer, right? So it's tremendous execution coupled with the right conditions. And you need to have both.
What I'm just curious about is, as India is growing rapidly, like looking at GDP, comparing to the Western countries, is it the place to search for these vertical singularities just because of sheer number of development?
The interesting thing is,
maybe it's a fallacy what I'm just saying.
Exactly. So the fact that you asked this question,
the
fact that you're asking this question to me says you're perhaps now becoming susceptible to a trap, right? One discussion we had very recently on an episode of Practical Nerds is one of the defining characteristics of a vertical singularity or a category creator is when it's actually being built in the early days. And the early days could last from anywhere the first few months to even the first 3 or 4 years, frankly. Yeah. It'll actually not seem like an attractive opportunity at all, right? It'll seem like it's either needlessly complex or needlessly simple even. It'll seem like a model which is not designed for to absorb venture capital. It'll seem like something incumbents could easily do. It'll seem like something which doesn't have enough tech perhaps, or the tech is sort of in the background, not in the forefront. And generally speaking, when you combine all of these things together, it is not an opportunity where if you poll 100 people, more than 50 would say, okay, you know what, this is something to do. Yeah. Generally not. In fact, I would say less than 10 would even consider digging any deeper.
Within venture.
Yeah.
I want to touch on...
By the way, just to make sure I'm not misunderstood, that is not to say there's no opportunity for vertical singularities in India, but if you start the way you did, you're setting yourself up for to be trapped. Yeah.
I want to also touch on earned knowledge, and then we'll move on to investor-founder relationships. So, Patrick.
So I can actually segue us nicely from the vertical singularities into earned and nuanced knowledge, right? So another portfolio company of ours is Enter, a company that we're very proud of, and we think they're on to doing something really unique. Now the company has raised 4 rounds over the last 2 years, not because of any popularity contest at all. Quite the opposite. The company has had its fair share of misunderstandings with generic VC investors and so on. The reason for their fundraising success is because the business is doing very, very well. They're the clear market leader in energy audits for energy building renovation in Germany, and I would say probably across Europe. And the vertical singularity in this case, but the knowledge that you needed in order to see it had to do with the data that you need in order to renovate a building in the right merit order. So there's when we invested, we led the pre-seed in early 2022 in Enter. Our thesis, literally in the investment memo, said there's 3 types of data for designing energy renovation measures for buildings. The first one is the pure energy consumption in terms of kilowatt hours of the building, power as well as thermally, right? The problem with that data is everybody has it and it has no value. The utility has the data, the meter operator has the data, the landlord or the building owner has the data. Everybody has the data, but it has almost no value because knowing how much gets spewed out of the window doesn't tell you what you need to do where in the building in order to optimize the footprint. The second type of data that we wrote in the thesis was it's the load curves of the technical equipment of the building, right? So it could be the boiler, it could be the heat pump, it could be the solar that produces on the roof, right? So this equipment that contributes to either the generation or the consumption locally of the building of power or heat, it has it tells you at what point in time does it run how intensely. Again, this is not a particularly valuable data. It's better than the consumption data only, but it's data that is owned by the OEMs of that technical equipment, and it's very, very tough to get into it. And again, it alone does not tell you what is the merit order of energy renovation measures in order to achieve an impact. But the third type of data nobody had, and that's the data about the physical substance of the building. What is in the walls? How thick are the walls? How many panes does the window have? How big is the window surface? Is the roof insulated or not? Is the foundation insulated or not? That is something you cannot Google. That is something you cannot just assess remotely with the existing technology prior to Enter. And so that's Enter, where Enter actually developed the technology in order to go after the physical substance. And that's a moat. But when they presented that to a lot of investors just passed. Oh, you can't do it remotely and instantly. You're not monetizing recurring revenue as a SaaS. It's an outcome, it's a service. I mean, it was a damn profitable service, but still, right? So it violated a lot of these narratives that people were chasing, right? And so you had to have nuanced knowledge in order to know that the physical substance is actually going to allow you to build a moat and to design the merit order of the renovation measures. We had that nuanced knowledge because on the one hand side, we cover the renovation space with Foundamental, and on the other hand side, we have energy background, right? And so the intersection of having those two backgrounds made us actually move on that company very swiftly just 4 weeks after the start of the Ukraine war, which was also then a confluence of timing when something like that, of course, would, we would be able to know that it would become in high demand. So the nuanced knowledge is what allows you to spot vertical singularities.
Probably most of SaaS investors would pass on it because it required a surveyor to go on site and to measure a few things, right?
Right. Today, not anymore. So now there is software, right? But if you look for the software in the first place, that's the fallacy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What about your unique approach to investor-founder relationships in terms of truths and shared discomfort?
I mean, look, I would say the truths. I mean, let's start with the shared discomfort. I think there's a lot to unpack there, and I think it percolates both how we choose to operate internally, as a contrast, I guess, with against other VC firms, and also how we kind of guide our own conversations with founders, both pre and post investment, right? So maybe we start from how typically it happens in other VC firms or most VC firms that we know, from our experience in other firms as well as seeing from the people we know. I think in a lot of firms, and by the way, just to set the context here a little bit, imagine in each VC firm, think of it like a very small mini corporation, almost like the equivalent of a family, multi-generational family business where you're kind of all leading up to the upper tier and you're hoping to eventually be a part and maybe replace them at some point of time. And until then, you're sort of working your way up. And there's several ways you can sort of prove that you're worthy of that accolade and so on and so forth. So with that in mind, keep in mind that the overarching objective of the firm is still to make money. It's not for individuals to be promoted. But the incentives are often structured in a way where the younger, I mean, not anything against younger people, but let's say investment professionals who have a inordinate incentive to be promoted, and that's what the driver. It's to sort of push deals and push positive discussions, push positive updates as a way to
Seem positive.
to seem positive, to seem like there's more positive action with the deals they bring, the portfolio they represent, and hopefully that drives their upward momentum. Because let's face it, as in human psychology, if you're seen as the person peddling bad news all the time, you're like, hey, this person always,
Here he comes
brings
again.
the mood down.
Yeah.
Am I really going to promote this person, right? That's the regular human mindset.
That's
Now-
a great observation, by the way. in
I mean,
general.
it's just unfortunately a fact of human psychology.
But it's very hard to spot when you're in that system.
yeah.
I agree completely.
Correct. And look, whether we like it or not, all of us like good news. We have an instant dopamine reaction to it. And
If they are fake, doesn't matter if they are good.
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
Exactly, right? And again, I'm not everyone who has a tendency to peddle mostly positive or entirely positive information does it with the intention to deceive everyone or whatever. I guess they're just looking out for themselves, and this is what they believe is the rules of the game. Now, the unfortunate aspect of all of this is there comes a time when you no longer think that you need to factor in enough of the bad news, and you're constantly in the Kool-Aid drinking mode and in the Kool-Aid peddling mode, right? To the point where bad news either doesn't factor in adequately to your decision making, either for new investments or on an ongoing basis, or you wait until some very obvious external signal tells you that you should look at the bad news.
And unfortunately, it's this wrong setup that over time has crept into the industry that then makes the employed investors that we're referring to here not embrace the discomfort, but to release the discomfort on the founders. Why? Well, because you don't want to deal with the bad news, right? So this is when founders experience, let's say a founder team goes into fundraising. And we've all seen this, probably in every fundraising where we have co-investors, where the co-investor, an employed investor at a large firm, is then calling the founder 3-4 times a week, hey, how is fundraising going? Not because they want to help, but because they want to have news to report.
Yeah.
Because they want to say internally, hey, by the way, this company of mine that I led the last round, they are talking to this firm, they are advanced in that firm, etc. There's no content contribution to it.
Which means that probably was right. Yeah, signaling to peers that, oh, I was right because these people. Yeah.
Exactly. And kind of keeping the narrative going rather than helping with the substance. And for the founders, that's a very bad situation. Every founder that is in that situation is rolling their eyes. They're like, okay, I mean, just get on board and row or get out of my way. But in this instance, unfortunately, and that happens all the time, these employed investors will do exactly that. And that releases discomfort. It adds additional pressure on the founder. It adds additional mind space or occupies additional mind space, and that should not be the case, right? So for Foundamental, we've really, when we realized this over our journey, we've made it our principle exactly not to do that. We don't care how the fundraise works out or not while the process is ongoing. We release all of our help into it, right? And we will even make our own evaluation whether to preempt the firm, but we don't look left and right what conclusions other people come to. And the reason for doing that is because our setup is constitutionally different. Our setup is that the owners of the firm are the ones who work with the portfolio companies. The owners of the firm are the ones who invest their own capital. The colleagues that we have, they share the equity in Foundamental, right? And so that is constitutionally different setup than the setup that leads to the fallacy that Shub is describing, where the original founders of a revered venture firm try to scale something that is unscalable, and because they wanted to scale it, they needed to hire more and more employed investors, and that then creates this fallacy of, hey, I need to report great news in order to get promoted.
I mean, one thing to keep in mind, and I think we saw definitely a climax of this kind of behavior in 2021, and I don't think it'll ever leave the venture ecosystem entirely, but whether we like it or not, I mean, stating the obvious here, as a VC firm, we're all supposed to be investment professionals or investors. I think behavior that we just spoke of in a vast majority of VC firms. If you think about it, the person in that situation or in that capacity is not acting as an investor. They're acting either as a broker or a sales rep. In other words, you're acting as a middle person with the ambition of facilitating a sale between a prospective portfolio company or a portfolio company and someone more senior in the organization, or between the portfolio company and someone who could potentially finance the next round. And you're constantly just sort of brokering these deals in the hope to further your own standing in the firm, without pausing and thinking, hey, what does this actually do? Regardless of what happens as an externality, what happens to my holding, if I even have a holding, with referencing what Patrick said. But if the firm's holding, what does that do to the firm's holding if you remove all externalities? Is it really gearing up to be a great outcome? I think not enough VCs through the entire organizational structure pause to think about that, because they're structurally not aligned to enable that.
Yeah, sounds like, as you said, structure of traditional VC firms is not well set up for good outcomes. So how do you embrace the culture? Because it needs to be ingrained within the employees and the members of Foundamental not to copy this behavior. How do you embrace the culture?
Is it like a system that you guys have, or like a process?
I would say our system is not unique in that regard compared to, for example, other firms that are founder-led, right, that are founder-owned. Other firms that have kept their size, both in terms of the funds and the commitments that they manage, as well as the team, right? So that's been our principle, and there's other very successful funds who operate under a similar principle and who probably come to the same result and convictions that we do. So that's like the first thing. We believe it's a structural answer in order to create this culture. You need to have, the founders of the firm cannot pull back. They cannot just, do sailboating the whole week or sit on an island the whole week, but still retain most of the equity. It should be the most experienced people working with the portfolio. So at Foundamental, that's a structural choice. It's Adam, Shub, and me who actually do all the portfolio work with the companies, right? Because it should be the most experienced ones that use information in order to help founders make decisions, right? That's a contribution that you can expect from your VC. But if you delegate it to a junior person with less experience, that's a bad structural choice. The second one is investors should share in the equity, right? And so most VC firms make the choice that, no, let's accumulate most of the equity at the top. And then, if you're short of becoming a partner, I can perhaps have you participate, but not really, right? And so for us, that distribution is different, right? So in order to make sure that our investors, our colleagues, are not incentivized showing us only the good news so that we always have bad information, but in order to actually discuss with us all the information, the good and the bad, in order to help a founder come to great decision making. And that comes with the incentives, right? So that for us is the second thing. And the third one is, at some point, communication does not scale anymore. So keeping a small team in a knowledge-based job that the whole value is driven by decision making, like VC, you need to make sure that information flows exceptionally seamlessly. And for that, keeping small teams is really key.
So in your letter, I'll make a point to a statement you made. Vulnerability is a sign of strength, which sounds counterintuitive, right? Can you elaborate on this?
Let me take that one. So I think when we said this, it was actually more of an homage to some of our best founders. But I think it equally applies to discussions internally. What we have found, and I think it applies across regions, in our best portfolio companies today, including the ones that are at exceptional levels of scale, have raised from the best investors in the world, you go to any discussion with any of these founders, it'll not start with good news, or the meeting will generally not be about good news. It'll actually very much focus on what could go better, what should go better, what they need to improve on. Always trying to dampen the attitude by, as the Germans say, pouring a little bit of water into the wine to make sure not everyone is high and expecting good things all the time.
That's because to save some money.
Maybe.
And I think I really appreciate that. So I have to say, what I actually look out for, and if I may borrow, it's kind of like a singularity as a character trait in founders and individuals, very few people have the maturity and the self-confidence and the gravitas to, and this is in a conversation before, let's say, we have committed, this is while we're evaluating, to actually admit all the things that are not going so well, their own limitations, but acknowledge what they're working on and work towards it.
And that's who you want to work with, right? Because again, I mean, the first principle of VC, one of the first principles of VC is we're in a decision-making business. We need to get a few big decisions really right. And the same goes for founders. They take like 10 decisions a day, but probably there's one decision a year that really changes the trajectory. So what you need to have is two things in order to come to great decisions. You want to have all the information that you can have, and then you need to have the ability through a circle of well-wishers, employees, investors, could even be business partners, customers, suppliers, to process the information and come to a trajectory-changing decision, right? And so for that, you need to be constitutionally capitalized to process the bad information even more than to process the good information. And so that's where a great investor will help a founder deal with that by embracing discomfort, what we discussed earlier, but also by holding them accountable to be vulnerable to the bad information.
You know, I actually think it plays an even more fundamental role in the sense, and this again is true both within our internal team as well as in our conversation with founders. If you put out uncomfortable and unpleasant stuff right out at the start and your investor doesn't run away, that's probably a very good fit in terms of, so it is very likely that when you go through bad times in the future, that investor has understood the business well enough to stick with you in those tough times.
Yes.
Right? That is also true for us as an organization. If we embrace the act of accommodating discomfort as part of our regular discourse, that means the next time we have an intense conversation which is uncomfortable, people will not react to it, either take it personally or take it as an affront. It's just part of doing business very effectively. And I think if everyone within our setup gets comfortable with that, that allows us to function optimally in all situations, rather than saving the uncomfortable news for a bad day and then, I guess, seeing if that has people react to it badly or not.
And that's hard for, in general, people across society. It's hard to deal with, bad information, to deal with anxiety, to deal with stress, but unfortunately that is founder life, right? And so most founders, I think, rationally know what they're getting themselves into before they found. They know that they're signing up for that journey, but living it is then, of course, a different ordeal, right? And so it's the mature founders and the mature personalities that actually are able, within those situations, to call their trusted advisors, their shareholders, and say, hey, help me out with this. I don't know how to solve this, or I need additional perspective. I need additional information. Here's what's happening. This is whatever, where the margin dropped. This is where the customers churned. This is where the channel partnership actually canceled. All of these things, you need to be a very mature person, even among the highly mature founders that typically, or the people that make up a highly mature set of founders, you need to be extra mature to have that conversation. And that's where you want investors in your corner who have exactly the same mindset. I always say, truth plus transparency breeds trust. And the best founder relationships that we have, when they hear someone like us say that, they say, exactly. And it's the immature founders, and sometimes we do have, unfortunately, these partnerships as well, who then feel anxious, who feel like, oh my God, this discussion is too intense. I need to stop the call, etc. And when that happens, that's a very sad moment, because it's actually not going to set you up for success.
And these uncomfortable conversations, or embracing the reality and discomfort, does it happen during board meetings or during some more regular conversations?
Perhaps it's a little bit individual. For me, it happens mostly outside of board meetings. First of all, because I don't do a lot of board meetings. I mean, I attend where I'm a board observer, but I would say 95% of the work with founders, that founders work with me, happens exactly in between board meetings. Right? It's a lot of phone calls, a lot of video meetings, WhatsApp messages, etc. So just statistically, it happens in between.
Yeah, same.
Can you teach the trait of being vulnerable to to a founder, or is it something that comes natural, or is it a direct effect of how you guys work with founders?
Good question.
So I guess I could, but in my mind, I'm thinking, why would I want to? Because I'm not in the coaching business, I'm in the picking business. I want a finished article and save my effort so that I can move on and look for the next finished article. Look, my job is not to train a particular person that I see in front of me. Why would I do that? I might as well just find someone else who's actually invested the time to get themselves up to the level of readiness and reward them for doing that to themselves, for themselves.
So my answer is going to be, it's going to be the exact same direction, but for additional reasons, right? The founder journey is hard enough if you're in a simple industry, which in AECS, founders who choose this industry are not in a simple industry.
Crazy.
It's a crazy industry with a lot of nuance.
Complex, right?
Lots of complexity, right? And so as a VC investor, you're piling assumption and assumption and risk and risk and risk on top of each other by picking this industry and then picking a person where you say, oh my, that's a raw, I know exactly they're not vulnerable enough. Like it's not always that you can say it like that, but if you could, then you're saying, hey, it's not vulnerable enough, and perhaps the communication is not good enough, and oh my God, I mean, business skills are also not there. So you're gonna stack a lot of assumptions on top of each other to work out for you in the end. It's just from making a business statistically work to generate that generational company. It's going to be almost like Drake's equation. You're adding so many variables that the eventual result of the equation is going to be just too small for you to work, right? And so, unfortunately, if you go into a complex industry like ours, I've seen the most mature founders build the most generational companies. And so that's what, as a founder, you want to be honest with you about is, am I mature already, or do I need to go through a little bit more personality learning before I want to found in this industry? Mm-hmm. And that, by the way, can happen at all ages. I would just want to say that I've met immature 55-year-olds and I've met very mature 20-year-olds in this industry.
Have you guys got any specific examples of how Fundamental's convictions have guided investment decisions and partnerships with founders?
I mean, I stay away for the last 2 years or so from founders who can't deal with directness, for example. I mean, directness can be very respectful, right? Directness is also when I appreciate when a founder has built something exceptionally difficult. I say that directly. But then when you see one or two aspects that you think the founder perhaps has not thought about enough yet, it's also respectful to the founder to actually call that out. And the mature founders, and luckily I meet most mature founders, they absolutely love it. They send
feedback, right?
Exactly. Because usually, like when you talk to a VC investor, like, what do you think you're getting? Well, you're getting like generic emails, short paragraphs. Sorry, see you next time, next round. Why? Because it's better for the VC not to close the doors, right? It's not how we operate. So for us, truth and transparency breeds trust. And the mature people, again, it's most of them, they absolutely love it because it's the first time that someone actually puts real thought into helping you build your business. Whether they invest or not is then secondary, but they help me build my business, right? And so it's this directness that I think goes really, really a long way with people if it's being delivered respectfully, which I think we master.
I think in addition to the stuff you've already discussed, and maybe this is a byproduct of the kinds of businesses that we've generally seen take off more in emerging markets, etc. I definitely have now, not just now, going back as well, have a bias for founders who are prepared to do extensive reporting, both pre and post investment, in terms of, hey, if I have 10 different things I want to learn about the granularity of the business metrics, you better be prepared to produce, measure it, report it in a manner that makes sense.
If a CEO, you ask them, I mean, Shrup, if you ask a CEO about their margins and he looks to his CFO or she looks to his CFO.
So to give you an example, so there's a company, I mean, ironically, that was a SaaS company, so it's not exactly in line with what I was talking about, but in the case of that SaaS company, so there was like a enormous difference between what was reported as revenues and what was shown to us. And I actually asked the guy, hey, how do you explain this? And he's like, hey, I don't know, I have to ask my CFO. That is not acceptable, right? Actually, this is an extremely rudimentary example. This of course would be an immediate red flag. But I guess the question is more on what gets us excited in terms of building a very high level of conviction. And there I think if you're a founder, you better get used to reporting a lot, because I think what I've seen, it's an early and leading indicator of success. Yeah. Because you're setting your company up. Quite often, if you're at like say pre-seed or seed stage, you take a lot of things for granted. And look, to be fair, even VCs are, the VC tribe is responsible for some of that. There's this generic wisdom going around that, in early stage, a lot of things are acceptable, or you don't need to report stuff, or team matters, other things don't, blah, blah, etc. But you are actually building up that muscle on what you need to scale your company to eventually, go public, for instance. You don't just randomly build that muscle 5 years into the future suddenly. Mm-hmm. You train that muscle from day one, and this is part of training that muscle. And if you show reluctance to train that muscle today, I might decide that, hey, you're not in a position to exert that muscle in the future.
And again, that has to do with also the knowledge that the founder earns, right? So if you're basically just delegating knowledge about your P&L to someone else, what does that tell you, right? And so that doesn't fit with our conviction. Another example of exactly the same kind is when founders refuse to do annual audits. Oh, it's too onerous to do an audit with a Big 4 firm or a Big 10 firm. For us, actually, there's a completely stark correlation between how generational companies in our portfolio look and how early they have done audits.
Yeah.
So in construction technology and technology broadly, things change rapidly in startup world as well. Do you stay with your convictions or you adapt them? How does
the thing is, as we say over here, stay humble. So as a part of staying humble, you can't rigidly hold on to an initial set of hypotheses and assumptions. Right, and this translates into several aspects. The underlying market conditions and realities may change. What was a singularity 5 years ago becomes very, very mainstream today, and therefore, what would constitute a singularity today is something completely different. Yes. So, for instance, when infra market was a singularity, no one was looking at it. Once it became like a unicorn, etc., suddenly there's like tons of infra market for X and infra market for Y coming up all over the world. And as you can imagine, we were in a privileged position to see most of those.
And pass on most of those.
Yeah, exactly. So, which is why what needs to, by definition, if you're on the hunt for vertical singularities, it cannot be a singularity if it was discovered a few years ago and now everyone's figured it out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I've got one last question about your job as an investor is to return your investment, yeah?
And hopefully much more.
And much more, and to your LPs and whatnot. If you have a founder that is perhaps not mature, but their performance in terms of returning investment to you much more and your LPs, how do you balance that? Is it like do you kind of, I don't want to say it, but like park them to one side a bit and let them crack on, or do you?
It probably never happens, simply because we're operating on such a long feedback cycle, 7 to 10 years, until we really truly know whether that founder will return and whether we will use that to return our money. That what looks like a great book return or a great snapshot of a performance today, if the founder is immature, we always have to ask ourselves, hey, let's extrapolate. Let's see what assumptions we're baking into this for the next 5, 7, or 10 years. And do we think that, to use your case, if it really is like a very immature person, an obviously immature person, is it likely that these assumptions are going to come to fruition, right? Or are we actually stacking too many assumptions onto each other? That would probably be most of the cases where, it's not like we know that they will deliver performance and we have to operate on assumptions and an immature person stuff. But let's twist your scenario perhaps a little bit and let's say, hey, there's a founder who IPO'd for 10 billion. Solo founder, and you can say everything was just attributable to this founder, which that never happens. But let's say, right? And now this founder is founding a new company, and it's founding a new company in AECS. And she or he is discussing with us, I would say we would pass on that. Because the other function is, what we have learned, all of our convictions are framed that way because it creates a loyal partnership between the founders and between Foundamental, where you take care of each other, right? When it's not going very well, we're the first ones to see, hey, no problem. If no one else gets it, we have conviction. We see what's going here. We know why it's not going. We think you are the ones to operate it. Let's do a new round, right? But if the founder is immature in that situation, they will actually put pressure on you to put more money in spite of bad performance, in spite of doing something bad. If things go well, the immature founder will say, yeah, but I don't know if I want you buying more equity. Let's go somewhere else. And so over time, with the really immature founders, you're never finding yourself in a place of family. You're never finding yourself in a place where you take care of each other that will contribute to each other's win-win. And so that's why in that case, unless the circumstances are something I cannot imagine right now, we would probably still be passing on it.
I think very well put, in full agreement.
Any convictions that you guys have unlearned?
Ooh, where to start?
Go for it.
Let's say first 10.
We only have a few minutes left.
So I wanted to share this earlier. It fits very well at this position. So when you start in VC, even angel investing, which is where I came from, one of the things you learn very early in order to make a name and in order to find deal flow is networking and talking to as many investors as you can. I unlearned that. So today, when I compare like what my day and how I spend my time looks like to a lot of the friends that I have in other firms, and they're really friends, I probably spend 3, if not 4 times less on speaking to other investors about deals than they do. And that's a muscle that you need to unlearn. And why is that? It has to do with exactly everything that we're discussing in this documentary. It has to do with the vertical singularities, the nuanced insights that you need to build, the unique convictions that generational companies do not repeat, and I need to operate from a first principles perspective, that fundraising and PR and how large a team are very poor signals, as is social signals from investors looking at deals. And that's why, as an investor, I had to come to the conclusion that this is not contributing to my decision making. What's contributing to my decision making is spending time with the founders, with the customers, with the suppliers, and actually thinking, right? And so I think that's such an underrated skill among investors when you're kept in the trap of, let me chat to as many investors as possible. And that only makes you a broker, most likely. It doesn't make you an investor.
I mean, just to corroborate what you said, I'd done an analysis for myself 2 or so years ago, just to do an inventory of all the misses I regret and all the hits I'm proud of. What I realized is all the biggest misses, there was like a very consistent pattern where I was initially excited, but then someone talked me out of it, right? And just to be clear, that someone always had like a good intention at mind, but it's like that someone will say, hey, for XYZ reason, this will not scale, or so-and-so is saying that, this market is not attractive, etc. I mean, in some of those cases, that other fund has gone and actually done the follow-on round. So it just goes to show how fickle these opinions are. And the investments I'm so proud of are all usually things where in the beginning there was enormous resistance, but I was able to push it through. So even I've actually come to a very similar realization where, I, like many of the people I'm in touch with, and I'm very grateful for the network it represents and the residual value it provides. But I have also learned to realize that there is such a thing as too much exposure. As in, you take in a certain optimal amount. Anything more than that has, unfortunately, the aspect of biasing or anchoring you in an undesirable way. You have to allow yourself autonomy to form your own opinions. And even going back to what we discussed earlier about discomfort and so on, if you learn to respect and place yourself and your own team and your setup at a higher level than the wider market and operate in that sort of way, you'll generally do well. Assuming, of course, you're competent, etc., which is what we assume, right? If, in spite of you being more competent, you don't have the confidence or the emotional fortitude to do that, well, you're just going to be at the mercy of random statements made here and there by the wider market, and then frankly, the performance is going to be mediocre.
Okay, guys, so
Perhaps one more that I unlearned. So when I started as an investor, the common wisdom that other investors would tell me is, Patrick, the most important currency in VC is growth. That was a sentence that was said to me multiple times. The most important currency in VC
that
is
sticks,
growth.
to be fair.
It does stick, but unfortunately it sticks also to a lot of wrong companies, right? And so I had to unlearn that, not because I had applied it as much, but because it was just being like a mantra. It was repeated in the social circles of VC investors that I was a part of, right? And I'm sure, the same things were happened in back rooms in San Francisco or in India, anywhere around the world, right? But actually, the most important currency in VC that I realized is just substance. If you're building substance, it doesn't matter as much if you're building it over 1 year, 4 years, or 10 years, because that's why VC then should come in order to accelerate you scale the substance. But unfortunately, if you follow with the other mantra, you're forgetting exactly that. You're coming in order to scale something that has no substance and perhaps no place in the first place.
Interesting. So substance seems like the outcome as a product rather than just SaaS software.
For example, it could be in the margins, it could be in the work cash flows. Another thing, real quick, right? So another mantra that we met in 2022, right after the crisis, was when other VC friends looked at our marketplaces, like it was like lemmings, like penguins. Everybody said the same thing, like parrots. They were saying, "Oh, but what is the contribution margin in relation to working capital?" And we were like, hold on, did you five just have a conference call before you called us? Or like, why is this happening? Net profitable business, high contribution margin. And yes, it did have 60 days of working capital. But if you looked at the working capital return, it was what, 25%, 30% annualized interest rate on the working capital. And we were like, you're not getting it. You have to cram as much working capital into this business as possible because it's a cash flow engine and a cash generation engine. But because the parrots were talking to each other, they were like, no, I don't back working capital business right now.
By the way, that has led to a different thing altogether. I mean, we'll probably talk about it in a different episode. It has swung from one extreme to the other, where the consensus is now in a very different direction.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So unlearn the social signals.
You can always call these friends, ask them for opinion, and then do the opposite, and you probably will be right.
That's actually pretty good advice.
That's very good advice.
You're welcome.
Love it.
Pretty good advice.
We should definitely end on that note. Okay, thanks, Patrick and Shub. So next episode, we'll be discussing vertical singularities. We just touched upon them, but we'll be diving into the singularities and the future of AEC tech, from AI to robotics, the rise of modular construction, and the importance of sustainability.
Nice.
So stay tuned for that one.